They threw him into the dark and forgot he existed. No name, no trial, just the clang of iron doors sealing behind him and a whispered curse. Let the dungeon deal with him. And yet, the dungeon didn't kill him. It watched. At first, he crawled like an animal, ribs showing through skin, eyes burning with a hunger that wasn't just for food. It was for freedom, for vengeance, for something more. The other prisoners, they were long gone, eaten, broken, possessed. But him, he spoke to the walls, learned their breathing, tasted the moisture on the stones, and named the seasons by the fungus bloom. He became part of it, a creature made of flesh and fire, not magic, not steel, but something even the ancient dungeon had forgotten. Hope sharpened into rage. One day, a beast came, 12 feet tall, horns curved like dead moons, the kind that could crush a troll's spine with a flick of its claw. The human didn't run. He stepped forward with a spear made of bone and hate. And when the beast fell, screaming, it wasn't just blood on the walls. It was a message. The dungeon doesn't own me. After that, the rules changed. Doors opened that were meant to stay shut. Spirits followed him, whispering names no tongue had uttered in centuries. Traps misfired. Walls shifted in his favor. The very core of the dungeon pulsed like a heartbeat waking from a long, ancient sleep. Because somewhere, deep within its rotting, cursed roots, the dungeon realized. It hadn't trapped a prisoner. It had summoned a storm. The storm did not roar. It whispered. It stalked. And every level he descended, every beast he felled, the whispers grew louder. Not just from the monsters. Not just from the walls. But from the dungeon itself. He's not supposed to be here. He broke the pact. He remembers. He didn't. Not yet. But something inside him did. Something ancient. Buried. Coiled beneath layers of broken memory and scarred muscle. Because this wasn't the first time he'd touched these stones. No, this wasn't his first fall. The blood on the walls knew his name. The locked gates hissed it in rusted tongues. Even the watchers, those skeletal remnants of the dungeon's will, paused when they saw him coming, as if recognizing an old enemy or a forgotten god. And still he walked. Level 18, the forest of broken faces. Trees grown from bones. Leaves whispering the regrets of the dead. A place meant to break the mind. He sat beneath the largest tree and whispered his own sins aloud. The forest went silent, then bent toward him, as if to listen, as if to obey. Level 22, the glass sea. An endless stretch of mirrored ice, where every reflection tries to drag you down and drown you in the life you could have lived. He stepped across barefoot. Let the memories claw. Let the ice bite. But he never stopped. Because the fire in his chest was older than regret. He didn't walk like a man anymore. He moved like a story rewriting itself. And far, far above, in the world that had cast him down, strange things began to happen. Storms formed without clouds. The sun flickered like a candle in the wind. Old statues wept blood, and ancient kings dreamt of a man with no face but eyes like burning coals. Because the dungeon was changing, and the world could feel it. But they didn't know why. Not yet. They didn't know. The human was coming up a place that should not exist, carved not by stone, but by sorrow. Here, voices were weapons. Your own screams, turned back against you, layered with the dying breaths of all who came before. The deeper you stepped in, the more of yourself you heard, until you forgot which voice was yours. He entered silently. The echoes rose, his childhood, his fears, his mother's final breath, a name he hadn't heard since before the fall. Elias. It stopped him. Just for a second. Because that was his name once. Wasn't it? And then the dungeon shuddered. Not from his pain, but from his remembrance. Because the moment he whispered, "Yes, I remember," the walls cracked. The torches lit themselves. And a door, sealed for 1,000 years, began to bleed. The watchers saw it. The architects felt it. Even the gods, wrapped in their divine sleep above the stars, twitched. Because a human was never meant to get this far. Not without chains. Not without a leash. not without forgetting what he truly was. And yet, here he was. No leash, no chains, and worst of all, he remembered. Level 31 was supposed to be the end. The final trial. The heart engine. A living machine fed by pain, pumping curses into the world above to keep the dungeon alive. But when he entered, the gears halted. The chains fell limp. And the engine itself, alive with 1,000 years of agony, bowed. Because he had been here when it was built. He had been the one who bled to start it. He wasn't just a prisoner. He wasn't just a human. He was the dungeon's first victim. Its first creator. Its origin. A man betrayed, broken, cast into the machine, not killed, but bound in memory, recycled again and again until he forgot himself. Until now. And with every step forward, with every breath filled with ash and vengeance, he did not feel rage. He felt clarity. The dungeon had tried to erase him. But all it did was sharpen him. Now he stood before the heart. Its voice crackled. You cannot destroy me. You are me. And the human, Elias, smiled. No. I'm what you made to forget. But I'm what you'll remember last. He reached forward. And the dungeon screamed. The scream wasn't a sound. It was a collapse. 1,000 walls shattered at once. Rivers of molten memory burst through cracks in stone. Monsters, ancient, eternal, curled in on themselves like shadows fleeing the sun. Because Elias wasn't fighting the dungeon anymore. He was undoing it. He stepped into the heart. It should have killed him. It had before. But this time, it pulsed like a heartbeat sinking to his own. This time, it remembered him too. Visions flashed. The day they dragged him down, the pact of kings and mages, the curse carved into the first stone with his blood. The dungeon hadn't just been a prison. It had been a monument to his suffering. A spell to seal him in and feed on him forever. Until he forgot. Until he broke. But he didn't. He endured. And now, he rewrote the foundation. Every scream the dungeon ever swallowed, every soul it had devoured, rose like smoke behind him. Shades. Victims. Lost warriors. Innocent children. Forgotten lovers. Even monsters, twisted into beasts by centuries of torment, lifted their heads in silence. They followed him. Not out of fear. Not out of duty. But because he was the only one who remembered their names. He whispered them, one by one, as he walked the spine of the heart. And with every name, the chains loosened. The gears slowed. The curse unraveled. Until finally, there was only one name left. His own. Elias Varen of Hollow Reach, he said aloud. I was the first soul bound. I will be the last. And he reached into the pulsing core. Not with hatred, but with forgiveness. Not for them. For himself. The dungeon screamed again, this time not in rage, but in release. The ceiling cracked open. Sunlight, real, golden, forgotten, poured in. Roots that had never seen daylight reached toward the light like children's hands. And high above, in the world that thought he was long dead, the skies opened. For the first time in 1,000 years, the dungeon exhaled. And Elias. He didn't rise in triumph. He collapsed in peace. But this wasn't the end. Because now, the real climb began. He had undone the curse. Now he would face the ones who cast it. And this time, the human wouldn't be alone. The climb was not made of stone. It was made of truth. Every step Elias took toward the surface wasn't just a path upward, it was a path backward. Through time. Through memory. Through everything they tried to rip from him. The dungeon was no longer a tomb. It was a mirror, and it showed him what he'd been before the fall. A builder. A soldier. A man who loved too deeply. And was punished for it. He had fought in the Age of Unity. Helped forge the peace between realms that the High Kings shattered when their greed demanded more. He had refused to be part of their spell, the spell that would make the dungeon a living weapon. So they made him part of it against his will. Bound his soul. Used his blood to seal the curse. And when the walls were raised, and the first screams echoed from below, they celebrated. But Elias was no weapon. He was a seed. And seeds don't die in the dark. They wait. Level 1. He emerged to silence. No alarms. No guards. Just light. Real light. Wind. The scent of grass. Of sky. Of life. The world had changed. Cities had fallen. Kingdoms replaced. New powers ruled, but the shadow of the dungeon still gripped the land. Mothers still scared children with tales of the cursed place. Kings still mined it for artifacts. Priests still called it a divine punishment. They didn't know the truth. But they would. Because Elias wasn't rising as a victim. He was rising as a witness. And behind him, the others rose too. The spirits. The broken. The former monsters, now unshackled from the curse, followed, silent and glowing, like an army made of memory. He walked to the nearest village. The people screamed when they saw him. He looked like a ghost. But he smiled. "Tell your kings," he said. "Tell your gods. The dungeon has opened. The first soul is free. And the reckoning has only just begun." In the great palace of Marinthia, the sorcerer king choked on wine as the sky turned dark for a heartbeat. In the floating spires of the North Elves, the mirrors cracked as an ancient reflection smiled back. And in the hidden vaults beneath the Church of the Sacred Seal, the chained prophets whispered in unison. "He remembers. The human has returned. The dungeon walks." They tried to silence the whispers. Burn the books. Bribe the scribes. Swear the peasants to silence with coin and fear. But rumors are like wildfire in a dry forest, and Elias was the match. Stories spread faster than horses. The old dungeon had broken open. A man, not a god, not a monster, but a human, had climbed out of its deepest pit. And behind him came things. Things that glowed. Things that remembered. Things that made the air colder and the sky hum. They said he walked into ruined temples and the idols crumbled. They said he touched the earth and old magic woke up. They said he stared down a mountain troll and the beast wept. But Elias wasn't after power. He wasn't after revenge. He was after truth. He moved from village to village, not with sword, but with story. With names. He told people the truth of what the dungeon was. Not a curse. Not a divine punishment. But a crime. One built by kings. Fueled by lies. And fed for centuries by the belief that humans were the weakest link. Until now. And as he spoke, something ancient stirred in the blood of commoners. Because he didn't sound like a prophet. Or a warlord. Or a cursed soul. He sounded like one of them. And so, when the first of the silent blades came for him, assassins sent by the high tower, he didn't fight alone. The villagers stood in front of his door. Unarmed. Terrified. But unmoving. And the blades turned away. Because there's nothing more dangerous to a kingdom than a man who tells the truth. Except a man who makes others remember it too. But far to the east, in a citadel carved from obsidian and bone, a council gathered. Rulers. Sorcerers. Divine priests. Beings who had benefited from the dungeon's power for ages. They called themselves the Seven Pillars. And as they looked into a scrying pool and saw Elias walking across a sunlit field, surrounded by followers made of smoke and memory, they panicked. Because they remembered him. They remembered the one who said no. The one who tried to stop them before it began. The one who had vanished. Because they had fed him to the machine. He wasn't just a problem now. He was a crack in the foundation of their rule. And cracks spread. So they made a decision. Send the warden. Seal the gates. Burn the surface if we must. The human must not reach the spire. But Elias already knew. He had seen the spire in his dreams, the tower where they built the first stone of the dungeon, where they buried his name, and where the final lock still waited to be broken. He didn't flinch. He just kept walking. Because the dungeon didn't break him. It revealed him. And the world was finally ready to see. They came at dusk. The air turned still. The birds vanished. And the sun dipped too quickly, as if it too wished to avoid what was coming. The warden. A being not born, but forged. Built from the bones of traitors, the breath of dragons, and the sorrow of 10,000 condemned souls. It didn't speak. It didn't eat. It didn't bleed. It existed for one reason only: to erase the past. And Elias was the past. He stood in the old crossroads of Mirren's Hollow, once a village, now a ghost. Ash swirled in the wind. He waited with no armor, no army, just memory and resolve. The warden landed like thunder. Its form shifted: iron, smoke, flame. A sword longer than a man's shadow in one hand. A bell made of bone in the other. The bell tolled once. The earth cracked. And a voice, 1,000 voices in one, hissed. Return to silence. Elias didn't move. He whispered something beneath his breath. And the ground responded. Roots twisted from the dirt, not to fight, but to remember. A child's shoe. A broken doll. The stone of a mother's hearth. Mirren's Hollow rose, for a moment, not as ruins, but as it once was. The warden hesitated. Just long enough. Elias stepped forward. No sword. No shield. Just one hand outstretched. You don't have to serve them any more, he said. You were built to forget. But I remember you. The warden's flame flickered. Something ancient trembled. But pain is patient. And control, deep. The warden roared and swung the blade. And Elias, the man who had survived the dungeon's depths, the man who remembered, caught it. Not with magic. Not with might. But with will. The kind that endures when even the gods look away. For a breathless second, the world paused. And the warden, a thing built from death, saw something it was never meant to see in Elias' eyes. Not vengeance. Not rage. But forgiveness. And it broke. The blade shattered. The bell fell silent. And the warden, unshackled, ancient, exhausted, collapsed to its knees. Not dead. Just done. And behind Elias, the winds shifted. The sky cleared. And a voice, distant but growing louder, whispered across the fields. The first lock has broken. Far away, the 7 pillars stirred. They felt it. A weakening. A tremble in the bones of their dominion. The dungeon wasn't just crumbling. It was waking up. And Elias. He was already moving toward the spire. Toward the place where it all began. Where his name was stripped. Where kings made monsters. Where truth was buried. And this time, the world would watch him dig it up. The journey to the spire was not marked on any map. Because maps are made by men who wish to hide things, not find them. But Elias didn't need parchment or stars. The path was burned into his bones. Each step toward the spire made the world quieter, as if creation itself held its breath. The land began to change. Birdsong vanished. The trees leaned away from the road. Even rivers ran slower, as if afraid to cross the path of what was coming. Because the spire wasn't just a place. It was a wound. A gash in the world where the dungeon's first curse was spoken. Where the spell was sealed in ash and bone. Where the High King stood in a circle and said, "Let him be forgotten." And now, the one they buried in silence, was coming back. Elias reached the edge of the Greylands, the final stretch before the spire. Once, this place had been green. Alive. But the curse fed on life. And in the centuries since, nothing dared grow here. It was a graveyard with no bodies, only memory. And yet, Elias walked forward. Behind him, others followed. Not an army. Not warriors. But people. A blind storyteller from Malden who had dreamed of Elias before he even escaped. A child born with no voice who began to speak when he passed. A wolf that carried an amulet from the Age of Unity. And the warden, silent, now walking on 2 legs, not as a weapon, but as a witness. The closer they came to the spire, the more the world resisted. Storms that moved against the wind. Whispers in the soil. Visions clawing at their minds, showing them the lives they could have had if they turned back. But Elias did not waver. Because he had already lost everything. And still, he endured. The spire appeared not on the horizon, but inside them. They felt it before they saw it. A tall, impossible tower of black stone, piercing the sky like a nail through flesh. Built not by hands, but by command. each stone engraved with the names of those sacrificed to fuel the dungeon's power. Each name, except his. Because Elias had never been written. He had been erased. Until now. He stepped onto the obsidian stairs. The sky cracked. The ground shook. And the 7 pillars, watching from their hidden chamber in the clouds, finally stood. If he reaches the summit, one of them hissed. The spell breaks. The order collapses. We fall. They summoned the final weapon. Not a beast. Not a god. But a mirror. A perfect reflection of Elias. Made from the same memories. The same pain. The same power, but twisted with one terrible difference. It had no soul. Just purpose. I am what you would have become, it said, waiting at the summit. If you had given in. If you had broken. If you had obeyed. Elias looked into its eyes. He saw everything he had survived. Everything he had been forced to become. Everything the dungeon wanted him to be. And he smiled. Then let's see if what I am was worth the pain. He stepped onto the final stair. And the tower burned with light. The summit of the spire pulsed with ancient magic, wild, raw, unfinished. Storms churned in the skies above, drawn to the breaking of a spell older than most nations. The dungeon's roots screamed below, thrashing through the greylands, unsure whether to collapse or evolve. And at the top of it all stood 2 figures. One born of suffering. The other born of surrender. Elias looked at his reflection, the twisted version of himself. This other Elias was perfect. No scars, no weariness, no weight in the eyes. A man who had yielded early, who had knelt to power, who had chosen comfort over memory. The reflection raised a sword wreathed in silver flame. You are the mistake, it said. You chose to remember. You chose pain. Why? Elias stepped forward, slowly, calmly. Because remembering is the only way to change anything. Because pain tells us we're alive. Because I was never meant to survive. I was meant to return. Their blades clashed, not steel, but spirit. The battlefield wasn't stone. It was memory. Visions flared, the first time Elias laughed as a boy. The last time he saw the sun. The moment he was chained and dragged into darkness. The screams of the thousands who came after him. And at the heart of it all, the curse. The cruel, precise words carved into the dungeon's foundation, a spell designed to erase the first soul it devoured. But now, Elias stood atop that very structure, with that soul whole again. As the reflection raised its blade once more, Elias lowered his. He opened his arms. You are part of me, but I no longer need you. And with that, the reflection cracked, then shattered into wind. The sky screamed. The tower trembled. And below, the dungeon's core, now exposed to truth, pulsed one final time. And went still. All across the land, the effects were immediate. The curses that had plagued bloodlines for generations simply vanished. Chains shattered in ancient prisons. Forgotten names returned to tombstones. The dungeon, once a monument to betrayal, became a grave that could finally rest. Elias stood at the peak, eyes closed, face to the wind. Not triumphant. Not exalted. Just free. The warden appeared behind him, not as a servant, but as a friend. The others, the storytellers, the silent child, the shadows of the fallen, gathered at the base of the spire, looking up not in awe, but in understanding. Elias turned to the rising sun. I wasn't the first they tried to erase, he said softly. But I'll be the last. And with that, he stepped from the tower's edge. Not falling, but returning. To the world. To life. To story. Because in the end, he was never just the human from a dungeon. He was the one who walked through hell. And came back with the light.